Hey, my name is Olivia, and what's happening right now? Well, it all started with something strange that happened in my childhood home. My house wasn't anything out of the ordinary. It was built in the mid-80s, a regular suburban house with 3 bedrooms and a little backyard where I spent countless summer days playing with my brother. From the outside, it looked like any other house on the block. Yet the atmosphere within its walls had a peculiar weight, a feeling of unease that I could never quite shake off. Maybe it was the history of the neighborhood. Our area was really old. There were whispers around town that dark things happened there when the Spanish ruled over us. Just down the plus street from our home, there had once been a lake. It dried up decades ago, but it wasn't just any lake. The story said that during colonial times, it was a dumping ground for slaves from Senegal who had been executed for trying to escape. They tried to go home and were killed for it. The energy from that dark chapter of history seemed to hang over the whole area, especially over our house. Strange occurrences began long before I could even form coherent memories. My parents and my older brother had been living in the house for a few years already when the first strange event took place. One night, my mom still talks about it even now. She, my dad, my brother, and some cousins who were staying with us at the time were having dinner. Everything was normal, just family talking, eating, nothing strange. And then out of nowhere, they all heard it. A baby crying. Now, if you've ever heard a baby cry, you know the sound. It's unmistakable. This wasn't muffled or far away. It was as if the baby was right there in the room with them, loud and clear. My mom said everyone froze for a second, staring at each other in confusion. They thought maybe one of the neighbors had a baby over or something, but that wasn't it. Our neighborhood was small, and at that time, none of the houses nearby had infants. Plus, the cry sounded like it was coming from inside our house. After a moment of shocked silence, my dad got up and checked the rooms. My brother's room, the guest room, the hallways, nothing. No sign of a baby anywhere. Eventually, they shrugged it off as some kind of freak occurrence, but it left a weird feeling in the air. My parents said that night was the first time they realized something wasn't quite right in that house. After that, strange things became a regular part of life for us. At first, it was small, almost laughable stuff. The TV would turn off by itself in the middle of a show, or the lights would flicker even when the weather was fine. We used to joke that the house had mood swings. Things would go missing all the time: keys, phones, even entire pieces of clothing. But then they'd show up again in the weirdest places, places we had already checked. My brother, always the joker, would say, "It's the gnomes, Liv. The gnomes took it." We'd laugh it off, but deep down, we all knew something was wrong. As I grew older, I began to notice the oddities more. I was around 7 when things really started to get scary. My brother was in university by then, and he used to invite friends over to hang out at the house. I was the annoying little sister who always wanted to be around the older kids. So whenever they came over, I'd sneak into the living room or sit at the family computer pretending to play games, just to be part of the group. One night, my brother had a few friends over, including his girlfriend and a girl I'll call Carla. They were all hanging out, playing music, chatting. I was sitting on the floor near the computer, half listening, while I pretended to be busy with some online game when I heard Carla scream. It wasn't just a startled scream. It was the kind of blood-curdling scream that makes your heart stop. I looked up, and there she was, standing in front of the stairs, staring at something I couldn't see. Her face was white as a sheet, and her whole body was trembling. She kept pointing at the wall, right where the stairs met the landing. "I saw him! I swear I saw him!" Carla cried, her voice shaking. My brother rushed over to her, trying to calm her down, but she was hysterical. She kept talking about a man she'd seen standing on the stairs, watching her. She described him in vivid detail: tall, wearing a long trench coat, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. But what really got to her were his eyes. She said they were full of anger, pure hatred, directed right at her. The thing is, none of us saw him. The spot she was pointing at was completely empty. My brother tried to calm her down, telling her it was just her imagination. But she wasn't having it. She insisted on leaving the house, saying she couldn't stay there any longer. We never saw Carla again after that night. After she left, my brother started acting differently. He didn't joke about the strange things happening anymore. If anything, he seemed more withdrawn, like he didn't want to acknowledge what had happened. The house felt heavier, as if it was pressing down on us. I would hear whispers in the night, just on the edge of my hearing, like someone was speaking just outside my door. I brushed it off as my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. And then there was the night with the Hat Man. That's what I've come to call him. This happened a couple of years after the Carla incident. My mom was out of town for the weekend, and my brother had gone to a party at a friend's house, leaving just me and my dad at home. It was a typical quiet night. We were in the living room watching TV, flipping through channels and settling on some weird History Channel show about ancient aliens or something equally ridiculous. Then we heard the front door slam. Not just close slam, hard enough to make the windows rattle. My dad and I both looked at each other, confused. My brother wasn't supposed to be home for hours, but maybe he had come back early? We both turned toward the hallway, and that's when we saw him. A man standing in the entryway. He was tall, wearing a long leather trench coat and a wide-brimmed cowboy hat. His face was partially obscured by the shadow from his hat, but what I could see, I'll never forget it. His skin was pale, almost sickly, and his eyes were dark, hollow, like they didn't belong to a living person. For a split second, I thought it was my brother. He had a trench coat just like that, and the man's build was similar. But then I looked closer, and I realized that this man was different. His face wasn't my brother's face. My dad, ever the skeptic, said something like, "Must be your brother messing with us." But even he didn't sound convinced. The man in the trench coat didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there staring at us. And then without a word, he turned and started walking up the stairs. His footsteps were heavy, echoing through the house with a deliberate, almost angry sound. "Go check on your brother," my dad said, though I could tell he was uneasy. I didn't move. I couldn't. Something inside me screamed that it wasn't my brother, that we weren't alone in the house. Seeing that I wasn't going to budge, my dad stood up and headed for the stairs. I followed behind him, my heart pounding in my chest. We climbed the stairs slowly, every creak of the wood making the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. When we reached the top, the hallway was dark. My dad called out for my brother, but there was no response. We walked to his bedroom door, and my dad knocked. Nothing. Finally, he opened the door and flipped on the light. The room was empty, the bed was neatly made, and there was no sign that anyone had been in there at all. My dad checked the closet, the bathroom, even the window to see if my brother had somehow climbed out. But it didn't make sense. The man we saw, he was too real to just vanish like that. We searched the rest of the house room by room, but it was as if the man had never existed. There was no sign of him, no explanation for what we had seen. My dad tried to brush it off, saying it was probably our imagination, but I could tell he was shaken. Later that night, my brother came home, completely unaware of what had happened. When my dad asked him if he'd come back earlier, he just looked at us like we were crazy. He'd been at his friend's house the whole time. After that night, things changed in the house. The air felt heavier, the shadows seemed darker, and the feeling of being watched became almost unbearable. We didn't talk about the man in the trench coat again, but I could tell my dad was thinking about it. Every now and then he'd glance up the stairs or pause in the hallway, as if expecting to see him again. Years passed, and eventually, after my dad passed away from an anaphylactic shock when I was 12, we moved away from that house. I thought I could escape the memories, the weight of what had happened there. But no matter where I went, the feeling of unease followed me. The strange occurrences seemed to linger, like a shadow that just wouldn't leave. Now, as I sit here, reminiscing about those days, I wonder if the Hat Man was a warning of things to come. Was he tied to the dark history of our neighborhood, or was he a figment of our collective fear? I don't know, but one thing I do know, I still feel his presence sometimes, lurking just beyond the edge of my memory, waiting for the right moment to reappear. Will I see the Hat Man again? The thought sends chills down my spine. As I reflect on those eerie nights, I can't shake the feeling that maybe, Just maybe, he's watching me still, waiting for the right moment to return.